Great to be joined again by the South Australian Liberal leader here on Flow FM, David Speirs. David, how are you going?
I'm good, thank you, Ricky. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful to have you with us, and you have spent some time up in the Riverland. Some serious concerns, including expressed by your local Liberal MP, Tim Whetstone, that we may be seeing a higher river than what the flows are telling us because of new infrastructure that's come in since the 70s.
Yes, I've spent quite a bit of time on and off over the last few weeks travelling around the Riverland, along with Tim Whetstone. It looks like these flows will be higher, not only because we've got some concern around the modelling, which we're now hearing flows of 220 gigalitres a day crossing the border, much higher than initially predicted, but the water levels appear to be higher. Now, this is because we believe that the river is managed differently. There's different constraints in terms of infrastructure in and around the river. All good things from an irrigation point of view often, but this seems to be pushing the river a little bit higher. And that means the overlays that are being used to map where the water would go and how inundation would occur seem to be a little bit out of whack. That's deeply concerning for me as the leader of the Liberal Party, but gee, it's a lot more concerning for people on the ground.
And just to confirm, you come at this conversation also as a former water minister yourself, so you've got some experience dealing with the water bureaucracy on these matters.
Yeah, absolutely. 4 years as water minister during times of reasonable drought and also water minister during times of plenty. So I got a very good understanding over those 4 years of how the river is managed, the cross-jurisdictional nature of it. It's a challenging part of the environment and water portfolio managing that river, but certainly learned a lot during that time and built up a good understanding of how it all works.
Now, David, I was concerned to hear some comments from the opposition about how some people who had been quite proactive in getting ready for the flooding, they might be slipping through the cracks in terms of support from the government.
Yeah, I'm seeing this all too often, and I'm really trying to, in a constructive way, because I don't want to politicise this thing, but say to the government, you've got to be a bit more generous in terms of your criteria for support, how we support people, and particularly finding businesses that might have gone out there or individuals and bought generators early, finding themselves possibly not able to get reimbursement through the generator grant scheme. Really, that needs to be retrospective within reason. You wouldn't reimburse a generator bought 2 years ago, but certainly one bought a couple of months ago should absolutely be reimbursed via the grant. There is also too tight a criteria around the business support grants. The business support grants, as they stand, essentially encourage businesses to close the door, shut up shop and go away for a few months. We want businesses, and businesses want to stay there. We're calling for a JobKeeper style model that like we had during COVID, so that businesses are encouraged to stay over and yes, their profits might drop significantly, but if they drop below a certain level, we say around about 30% of the takings compared to last year, we should actually be providing them with some financial compensation rather than saying we'll only give you compensation if you close up shop. There's a whole range of reasons for this, but particularly we've got a skills and labour shortage in South Australia at the moment. There are jobs everywhere. People may leave the Riverland, get a job elsewhere and not come back, and that could have long-term consequences for the sustainability of those communities.
So we've had conversations with Nicholas Senafani, also your leader in the upper house, who lives in Winky in the Riverland, as well as Tim Whetstone along the journey, and Tony Pasin. All of them have been on the same page about encouraging people to holiday in the Riverland and witness this flood event right now. But when we spoke to Nick Champion, the Trade Minister, he was saying he was concerned about people travelling up there now, saying it wouldn't be safe to holiday there, and this showyoursupport.sa.gov.au campaign was more about booking into the future. Isn't right now when the tourism operators need the income?
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly a bit of both. The Riverland, and let's fast forward in 8 weeks' time, will be absolutely flourishing from an environmental point of view. And I look at this through an environmental lens as much as anything else. So it'll be great to visit then. But these towns are quite safe to visit. If you think the major towns, Manham, Renmark, Berry, Paringa, those towns, they've got thriving town centres. There is definitely an opportunity to visit. Much of the accommodation is still available. People can't choose the river channel. They shouldn't be in and around the river, but you can watch it from afar. You've got to pay very close attention to the SES warnings and things like that, and have your wits about you. But just flicking through social media in the last 24 hours, there were plenty of accommodation offerings actually saying, come up now, watch the river safely from afar. It's quite a spectacular thing to see. So yes, you don't want to be getting in the way of emergency services workers and the like, but this isn't like a bushfire. It's not going to pose you imminent danger as long as you do the right thing. So if people have their wits about them and feel that they should go up there, you shouldn't be going exploring the back streets and back roads of these communities. But visiting the key population centres, it's quite safe at this stage.
Yeah, I looked at the Environment Department inundation mapping, which is quite detailed and shows even at 250 gigalitres, which is not yet being predicted for the region, most of the towns are well above, and safely out of the reach of that water.
Absolutely, and most of the main all the main roads really are open and safe to traverse. So again, only go if you feel confident to do so. Don't be going near the river. The river is well and truly off limits now because of not only the strength of the current, but also debris moving down it, which could cause a bit of strife if you get struck by it. But by and large, it's okay to visit those population centres, and many of the businesses are crying out for support.
Now, when it comes to what the opposition's calling for the River Murray, I understand you're also wanting the Australian Defence Force to be playing an immediate and more prominent role.
Yes, I think this would be very, very useful. I was a minister with a lot of responsibility during the bushfires on Kangaroo Island in particular. I saw firsthand the impact that the Defence Force had when they got onto the ground in terms of coordination, in terms of providing manpower. That labour effort makes a big, big difference. Levies need to be constructed. People need to be followed up to make sure they're safe. And there's a lot of things defence personnel could do. So as an opposition, again, trying to be constructive, we're saying to the government, let's help the community by deploying the Defence Force where sensible to do so. We think there's a real opportunity here, again, leaning back on that Kangaroo Island experience in early 2020. It was a transformational approach.
Now, your federal MP covering the Riverland, Tony Pasin, said Peter Malinauskas had failed his first major leadership test with the flooding. Those were comments a couple of weeks ago. Do you associate yourself with that analysis?
Well, I do, and in fact, I think Tony's language has been lifted a notch in recent days, because both Tony and I have been in the ground, and there's too many people falling through the cracks. The response around the big towns, your Rainmart, your Barrie, your Barmera, your Manham, is pretty good. But I'm coming across too many businesses and too many isolated towns and communities that are hurting, with power getting disconnected, with issues around sewerage, with people not qualifying for support because of very rigid application criteria. It's all a bit bureaucratic. And having visited Swan Reach, Morgan, Nildaughty, Walker's Flat on Tuesday, Wednesday this week, I was really struck by how many people are quite fearful and aren't getting the right information and support in those communities. One thing I think we don't necessarily realise, particularly in metropolitan Adelaide, those Riverland communities are as much a retirement community as, say, somewhere like Victor Harbour on the Fleurieu Peninsula. Many thousands of people have gone to those communities to retire. It means it's full of older people, full of vulnerable people, people who might need an extra little bit of support, and they don't all have places to go. Many of them want to stay home, and we're getting news reports today that hundreds and hundreds of people who have been advised to leave actually want to stay. Well, they're going to need extra support if they're going to stay. And again, that's why we say the Australian Defence Force might have a role here.
David Speirs, just before we go, 2022, naturally a disappointing year losing government after one term. What are you looking forward to in 2023?
Well, it's been a bit of a shocker for the Liberal Party this year, but what we've been able to do is unify, consolidate, pick ourselves up, dust ourselves down and move to the future. Fresh new team. And I'm pretty excited about 2023, just leading the team forward, in a job that I never expected to have as leader of the opposition. But we'll have a lot more to say about policy direction, our ambition for the state of South Australia, being a really functional opposition, not opposition for the sake of it, but actually constructive, challenging opposition. And I think what we have demonstrated in 2022 is that we've surpassed people's expectations. And I think a lot of people thought, gee, the Liberal Party will fall in a hole after that defeat. Well, actually, we didn't, and we're up and about.
Now, just to help us out on one topic you just mentioned there about leadership, the future of the energy mix, Peter Malinauskas jumped up and said he supported having the nuclear conversation, which your federal colleagues are talking about having the nuclear conversation. What has the opposition said around the Premier's comments and then his sudden back down after being given a lecture by Anthony Albanese that he was wrong?
Yes, that was all a bit bizarre. Look, Peter Malinauskas' comments occurred in the same article where I said the same thing. It was a mirror image. I am extremely open to that conversation. I think in a world where we're looking at decarbonisation in a serious way for a whole range of reasons, environmental and economic, we do need to talk seriously about nuclear energy. South Australia is blessed with great natural resources around wind and sun. Compared to other states, we might not need quite as much in terms of the nuclear option. However, we should be involved in that conversation. I am open to it. My party's open to it. So the discussion is really being led by the federal coalition, and we're slotting in behind them as a willing partner. I think there's a lot of opportunities. And one of the great ironies or even hypocrisies of our state is that we have pretty much the greatest uranium resources and deposits in the world, but we refuse to use it here for energy, but happy to send it elsewhere. That irony isn't lost on me, and I think it's a serious conversation we ought to have. It would be a long journey. You wouldn't get anything set up within a decade if you were to go down that track, but I think we should at least be open to it.
Well, plenty to cover in 2023. David Speirs, Opposition Leader in South Australia. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas to you and your listeners.